Thank you for having me. What I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of how I've used all the Adobe products since the beginning of my association with them. One of my very good friends, Mike Hanford's here. He worked with me on 2 Academy-nominated films. One, we shared an Academy Award on Titanic, and so I've known Michael forever. So my first film that I ever got a chance to use an Adobe product was on What Lies Beneath. It's my first film with Bob Zemeckis. And one of the things, I had worked at DD with Michael, and we used a nice piece of software called Nuke, and it just wasn't available for anybody to do any work on outside of Digital Domain, and I always liked to play and tinker and do stuff. I never really did composites myself. I would set them up and show everybody what I had in mind, and then the more I knew about it, the more I could help somebody talk them through a composite. So I didn't have that when I went to Sony ImageWorks, but I still like to do it. So I started picking up After Effects, of which it was never considered at that moment to be like, you know, what you would use to make a feature film with. But I didn't understand why you couldn't. And there was a situation came up where Bob Zemeckis was saying, why does it cost so much for me to do these kind of what appeared to be simple composites? They cost like $10,000 or $15,000 a piece. There was like 7 or 8 of them. So what I decided to do is like, well, let me give it a shot. At night, I'll set up a comp and see if it worked. And sure enough, it worked. So there was absolutely like 0 reason why you wouldn't do something like that. And I decided, so I did all 7 of them just as a test. And I told somebody what I was doing. And they said, well, you can't do that. That's not a real compositor. It's like, well, what do you think of the shot? Well, the shot looks good, but you can't use that software because that's not professional. It's like, well, if the shot looks good and the director likes it and it's in the movie, what exactly is not professional about that? And he said, you can't use it. It's a toy. It won't work. And I told him to do something that's probably anatomically impossible. And what I thought was a very funny joke is the fact that all the people from ImageWorks came up to me and says, we don't know how to charge for it because you used your personal computer, so you didn't use disk space, you didn't use a CPU. What do you charge for it? I said, that's your business, but I would give it to them for free as a little test of goodwill. And that's how I started using it, because there was absolutely no reason. It was just like a stigma attached to, oh, one thing is professional, somebody wrote it, and the other one is this piece of software. And then as you're using it, you go, well, I could do this for everything, and I could also work on my own, which I like to do. I like to appear like I'm off the cuff and I make things up, but actually I do study quite a bit. I work at home, and you need something to work at home with. So then after that, every movie I've ever done, including all these, some of them made some money. Some are successful. Some are considered professional in many ways. But I used it ever since. And then all of a sudden, as you start, you know, everybody has to use Photoshop. It's impossible to do a movie or any kind of presentation or anything without using Photoshop. And then they started to glue all of this stuff together. And it did something in such an impressive way that I called it my Swiss Army knife, because I had it on my laptop. I had it at every computer that I was using. And when I would work for Martin Scorsese, he was the first introduction to digital when we did a thing called Aviator. And on Aviator, what he wanted me to do was to come up with how to recreate Technicolor, 2-strip Technicolor and 3-strip Technicolor. And Sony bid on it, not to say anything bad about Sony, but you know, the price tag was $75,000 for them to do the R&D to do it. It's like, well, can't afford that, and I really want to do it. Let me dig out After Effects and let me see if I could recreate it. And I recreated it and gave it to Josh Pines. He incorporated, made a lookup table for it, and the entire movie was based on and used the work I did in After Effects on my laptop. And Marty got a big kick out of that, because it's like it's so kind of low rent in terms of that it was a guy doing it by himself on a laptop, yet it's in this movie that I think that was nominated for like 10 Academy Awards. But in the process of doing it, I had After Effects, I had Premiere, I had all the various tools. And Marty was doing something in his screening room and was getting very upset because he sent back a color correction 3 times and he still never got anything he liked. And he was getting really steamed about why is it work that way. And I said, well, you know what? Let me give me a minute. And so I dug out my stuff and I put it on his screen. I took the shot that he had problems with and I color corrected it. And he stopped and he looked at it and goes, so what the hell happens now? Well, can I have that? It's like, yeah, you can have it. Because, so, I mean, what do you do now? I said, I hit the render button, then you have it. And you could see his brain just start to like, holy He was completely impressed by the fact that what you can do, and then I can't go into all the stories I have of Marty, but we would do shots at literally the last second, the 4 hours before the film is filmed out. He knew that I could pull it off, and I pull it off because I have access to all these tools that I was going to use. So to establish some credibility, I'm going to show you the last thing I did, which was Jungle Book, where everything I've learned and everything I learned to do on my own, you know, all manifests itself in a movie like that, even though we used big stuff and it's a big, huge movie, and we had literally top-tier talent everywhere that you see in the reel. I can't take all the credit for it, even though they're not here, and I could, technically. I don't want to take top credit for it. I had brilliant, brilliant help. And then after that, I'm going to show you something that I started doing. There's another tool that I never really was fluent in, or I needed somebody's help, was doing any kind of 3D work. And for me, I'm never going to be a 3D artist. I wouldn't even give you a demo of it because I'm not very good at it. But what I do need is a sort of a little workshop where I could try out an idea and see if that idea can actually hold water before I go on stage and shoot it. And then I discovered a tremendous amount of freedom that I got, that now I can do everything. I don't need a guy on a box that costs a lot of money for me to test an idea that may or may not work. And also because I like to do it myself, it's sort of like sculpting. You kind of have to mold the clay yourself. It's really hard to tell somebody how to sculpt because it's like, you smudge it over here, and you start to learn and get a tactile feel to it. So I'll show you some really bad illustrations of Cinema 4D afterwards. But right now I'll play Jungle Book. And the first 5 minutes is pretty much, in case you haven't seen the movie, you'll see the movie, then you're seeing some behind-the-scenes stuff. So the next bit I'll show you, it's very unprofessional in terms of, you know, all the great people that come up here and show you how to use these great programs. And so I'm just learning, but I have to, you know, teach myself something. So here's what I did is there was a project that they wanted to do a test on, and they liked Jungle Book. They liked the way it came out. And, you know, again, the reason why it came out, it was a tremendous amount of pre-planning, figure out every shot, and then blueprint it out so when you walk on stage, you know exactly what you're doing. So you know, they asked me if I could help them do it, and I said yes. And they're all really good people, but they're not used to working in a way that is that they're personally informed by doing the work themselves. They rely on the visual effects department to create something. And what you discover with the visual effects department, if they're not stage people, they've never been on stage, they can't really communicate to the cameraman the same way they need to be communicated with because they just don't know. And so they're going to set up something they think may be helpful, but it's not really. And so I figure, well, let me try a 3D myself and figure out how I could do it and then what it means. So here's something's coming up. So this is a preview of the shot, and the guy was walking across this landscape, as goofy as it seems right now, but you still have to photograph it on stage. So in Cinema 4D, I set up what would be 12 by 12 blue screens, 20 by 20, the platform, all the stuff, and then I was able to figure out something that has plagued us from shooting live action on stage a lot, especially when you're imitating sunlight, is that the sun is infinite, and it's so far away that it doesn't really change on a stage. If you put a 10K or 20K up and you walk a certain distance, A, it gets darker for one, and two, the angle of the sun changes. So I discovered while I was doing the program that I have to move the light, and if I move the sunlight while he's moving, it'll absolutely imitate exactly what outdoor lighting would be. So once I did this, it was like, well, now I did every shot this way, and they don't know that I'm doing this, but I say, well, I'm prepared, and they try to work it out. And the production manager came up to me and said, there was no way we're getting all these shots. We could maybe get 8 of them done. It's impossible to do it. And I said, well, then just let me do my other word that I can't actually say in front of everybody, but you can find that word also on Wolf of Wall Street. Let me do my stuff and let me do it. And I was able to shoot 35 setups and wrap an hour early because I cut out all the plumbing because I knew exactly where every piece of blue screen went, where every platform had to go for a shot-by-shot basis. So I was able to reel it off. Of course, they thought I was really smart. But what it really was is I was really prepared, and because the days before it, and I was just learning this program, which is pretty amazing and incredibly deep, and you know, I really have a tremendous respect for anybody who does this sort of CG work. But it was like, well, the side benefit of learning to do these things yourself is that you may not finish the show in this, but you could preview your live action to the point where now you have experience as if you shot this many times before because you went through all the pitfalls. Where does the camera go? How high? Where's the light go? How much fill do you need? All these various things because you can light in it pretty easily as well. So the next thing I did is, this is another incredibly, hopefully I can explain this well enough, but I'll show you my illustrations. One of the really incredible things to try to recreate is interactive shadows on the foreground when the background is going to be put in later. That is kind of the holy grail of creating these illusions, especially, and I use this test for what we did in Jungle Book, where I had the interactivity of shadows on the animals interact with the kid, even though they're put in later. So this is an illustration. This is a bad setup I did in Cinema 4D, but here's a car going by. Notice that it goes back and forth. And you see the light change on him and the shadows are created. Okay, so you got that part. And then I needed to figure out how could I recreate this mathematically perfectly. So this would be a key light on the stage. Notice that there's no shadows of anything in the foreground. And then it's like, well, a projector could be a key light. So now it's a projector. So I've set it up in exactly the same spot. I get the same exact shadow that I get with a regular lamp, except now I could feed something into the projector. And one of the laws of physics, or the way things work, is a projector is also a camera. And a camera has a field of view, and it sees things. And then what I learned is that if anything is in front of that camera, so this is now the projector's point of view. This is what the projector sees if it were a camera. So it sees the pylon, sees the cars, and all that sort of stuff. So then, this is now figuring it out. You need something physical or tangible to figure out. So then I came up with, well, if I create a shadow plate that's exactly the same mathematical size as the objects that's supposed to be in front of it, and I project it, and I do my math correctly, it lines up perfectly. And I'll show you this. So this is what I fed into the projector, and it's a regular projector, like you go to a movie theater and project it. So there's that, and then as soon as I feed it, I now have, the shadow of the pylons, and then and also now the shadow of the cars. So that's your blue screen plate. And then later you do your composite. That's the background plate, because that's all could be created in CG later. And then when you comp them together, it lines up, and it is mathematically perfect. So in future films, like even Avatar and things like that, because I'm going to share this with Jim Cameron, that you could have fight scenes with various creatures and animals, and you really want to see that interactivity in 3 dimensions on the object. How do you do it? Well, you can now project a disembodied shadow on top of a foreground object, and that changes the way you would work. You could pre-animate various things and do all this pre-planning, and then make the composite seem that much more amazing because of that. And what was helpful for me is it's an idea I had that I have no way of actually proving or disproving it unless I build it. But I could build it in CG, and if I build it carefully in CG, I know exactly how high the projector is, how far away it is, how much is the light output, all the various things. And so I could test these ideas before I go to the stage. And when we went to the stage to prove it, it worked as advertised. And again, people thought I knew what the hell I was doing, but But it's actually fun for me to do it because the 3D portion was missing for me in all of my work as a supervisor, because I had to depend on somebody else. And the person I depended on, although incredibly talented and very gifted, didn't really know what I was talking about because they never worked on a live action stage. So I really needed to do it myself. And so within the tools of the Creative Suite, I was able to now, I have such a arsenal of material that I could come up with any idea, no matter how outlandish, realize a lot of them suck and don't show them to anybody, but then find out the ones that really do work. And in the process of me doing this, again, I'm novice. I really am. I've only picked it up for, in a couple of months when I was doing this, is I said I'll screw around and light a car. And when I was growing up as a cameraman, the idea of lighting a car was really hard. You have to have experience. You really have to apprentice somebody who knows how to do it, because you have to hang 40 by 60 rags and know exactly where the reflections are going. And what I discovered when I was playing with this illustration is like, well, let me put up a 40 by 60 rag in the computer. Let me light it, because I know how to light. Let me light it the same way. Let me put the reflections. And me, a novice, not knowing anything of how to do this, I was able to recreate something that looks kind of like a somebody who knew what they were doing lit a car, and I could take every piece of information that I used to create this, bring it to the stage, and now I had experience lighting a car, which I never did, because you really need to do it in person to see it, or you need some three-dimensional factual facsimile to be able to know with a great authority. If you put a camera here and you put a thing over here, it's going to reflect this way. So I'm going to go shoot a car at some point because now I know how to do it, and I didn't know how to do it before. But I thought I'd share that, like how somebody like me who isn't really skilled in this portion of the program and relies on the tremendous talents of people who learn this, can actually now communicate with them better. In fact, on this new film I'm working on, which I can't talk about, I got into CG lighting, where I want to imitate real live action work, and we're imitating landscapes and things like that. And now I could communicate directly with the lighter and say, don't put a light there, that doesn't work. I want you to use it this way and that way. And he says, well, we never did it that way. It's like, well, you're going to do it that way now, because that's the way we would have photographed in real life. And since I'm trying to create a movie that looks like it, you just picked up a camera, a la Jungle Book. You just picked up a camera and you photographed it, and don't draw any more attention to yourself than that. You can actually, communicate where I never could communicate like that before until I had it. So I guess part of my little, it's not a sales pitch because they didn't ask me to sell a product, but I'm selling it because of how it works for me. It gives me a complete arsenal where there's nothing I can't create myself, even in temporary form, to show experts how to do it. So it's been a tremendous help for me, and I'm hoping to impart that on you, that if you have it, use all the programs in it. I use Audition a lot, because sometimes when I do a presentation, what sells the presentation is sound effects. And if I could do it in 5.1 or 7.1, when I show something to somebody, all of a sudden they like it a little bit better because they hear surround sounds and all the stuff that you would never think to do in a presentation on a laptop. It's like, I'm not going to do it on a laptop. I'm actually going to make a DCP, which you can now do in Media Encoder, and I'm going to add 5.1 sound, and it becomes an immersive sales pitch. And again, it creates the illusion I know what I'm doing. And of course, and keep it secret that I don't, but I practice and do all this sort of stuff. And I use these various tricks of presenting your work in the best way, in the most professional way. So it's really hard. Almost goes right back to the original thing. Well, that was an amateur thing. It's like, no, it isn't. If I can do it and it looks good and it goes in the movie and no one knows the difference, it's as professional as anything else in the film. And so there you have it. So that's kind of my presentation. And if anybody has any questions, is there time for questions? Yeah. Okay, closing credits on Jungle Book. That was a thought that Jon Favreau had at like in January, and the movie's coming out in April. And again, he was like, well, wouldn't this be a great idea? No one knew how to really kind of pull it off in the time frame we did. So we mocked it up, and then I actually went to Disney and photographed that book, the real book, and I had the archivist who would not allow anybody to touch this book. This was like the real book from the movie. No one's allowed to touch it except for him. And then I said, well, you got to make it dance too, so you got to put a hole in the table and do it. So he was incredibly proud of the fact that he made the book dance and judder. And then we were going to open it up and take a look at, and do the what you see there, which we couldn't do because back then they were so cheap that book, the inside is actually the pages of Robin Hood. So they tore out what they had before and put in that, so they didn't have to make another book. So we couldn't even do that, so we had to mock all that up. So I photographed it, got the textures and all the stuff for that, and then we did the dancing book. And then, of course, all the rest of the material, as the book opens up and we preview that, the animals pop out, and that became what we're doing. And that got incorporated into a main title theme. And to talk about some stuff I did at the very last second, the main title company, which was very good, missed a couple of mats that we needed to actually superimpose some of the titles because it was in 3D over some of the other rolling credits. And I took it offline. I had my laptop, took it offline, recreated the mats, and brought it back in. This was like at 3 in the morning. And by 7 in the morning, we showed all the brass at everybody, and everybody loved it. And that was the end of the movie. But even then, when you have like a little toolkit that's like, okay, I can fix that. I know how to do that. So that's the story of the credits. So we were pretty proud of it, pretty happy with it. And it was kind of a little magical touch at the end of it. And also we want to harken back to the original. And so we wanted to definitely, and everybody's trying to talk us out of actually using the book It's like you have to use the book. You have to use the real thing. You can't create a CG version of it, even though we had to open up the book and do something else. Is there another question? Anybody else? Yes, yes, sir. The question is, when we did the interactivity with the creatures, and they're all plush and all that stuff, we imitated as much as we could, so the kid really is holding on to a facsimile of it to see what it really does, but then the CG artists replace the hands completely, and they're physically touching in the computer, while the computer is able to model 3D like real life, is able to actually move and manipulate the hair that's created in the computer, and then when they groom it and do all the various things, it looks like he's really touching it. And they did such a beautiful job of blending his real arm into his CG hand. And in fact, in the movie, there's about 100 or more shots of a digital Mowgli that are very hard to detect because visually it looks correct, and then also in keeping with the theme of the movie, action-wise it's correct. We're only showing you what a real boy could do in a real shot by a real camera, even though we're doing it on a computer, even though we did all these various things. It's like sometimes when you have the ability to do anything, you really shouldn't. You should limit yourself to what the audience remembers is practical and could really happen, and then you start to forget that you're watching a movie and you just watch the story. So we were proud of the interactivity, and we also kept it very sparingly so that it just looked like it was offhanded. It's like, yeah, he grabbed it and that was it, and we're not showing off like, look how cool we are that we could do this interactivity and do every shot where he grabs it. It's like, only use it when you'd use it if it were real, and throw it away the rest of the time and not pay attention to it. And so that was kind of the mode of operation for the movie to make a live-action film. So, oh, thank you. Anybody else, or are we done, or anybody else? One more question. Yes, sir. Well, the question is, what's the most important part of my job, or a job of somebody like me? Quite frankly, it's art first. It's interpreting the script, figuring out what's the best shot or best way to depict it. And then your science hat goes on. You figure out how to do that. But first, you have to start with the art portion of it. Why do I want to do that? How do I want to photograph that to best say to the audience? And you know, for us, we have to have the ability to see what's not in front of us, what it's going to be. So what I do is I add a bunch of pre-visualization tools to help me bridge that gap, because it kind of becomes too complicated just to have it in your head. You need to make it tangible, like the illustrations I did with the car, and then I just need to play with it and see if it holds water. But that's my job, is to say artistically, what is the best shot for this? Forget how it's done, doesn't matter how it's done. And if you could convince the audience that it's real, if it's CG, a model, live action, or any combination thereof, who cares? Because it just looks like what a shot. And then part of the thing is now you have to supervise to make sure that your original artistic intent, the throwaway nature of it, that it looks like it's just a shot and not a special shot, is maintained, because people want it, sometimes they want to embellish it and show off. It's like, you don't want to show off, you actually want to tamp it down under the top so it feels more like you just photographed it, you found in the trim bin, said, that's pretty much the best performance, best angle, let me drop it in. So the most important part of my job is actually restraint. Story, creativity first, restraint in execution, and then taste, literally, in how you want to depict it. Make sure it lives up to the standard of the movies that you're working on, and the great directors and producers and actors and things, so you're as professional as the rest of them. Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, he's asking, you know, do you pick and choose with artists? And it's casting. Some people are spectacular at something. You think, well, they'd be great at that. And you try it, and it's trial and error. You try, it's like, you know what, that's not your thing. You're great at this, so I'm not going to insult you and say you can't do it, but I think I'm going to redirect you and say you should be doing this shot and this person here. And a lot of times it's people who don't appear to have the background or the resume to do something has that, you see that spark, that aptitude that they have. And maybe in many cases what they're doing is, if they've done a lot of work at home and they actually have much more ability than is present in published work, and you detect it, you can find it. You see a bright light and you go, want to give you a shot, and a lot of times they'll go home and do it and then show you something and say, okay, you got the gig, because I know that you know what this, the heart of it, which is the art only, and then the execution you're going to figure out. And we don't have to be geniuses all at the same time. It's like, if we have a good idea, we will find the way to do it. And I like to work with a lot of geniuses, a lot of really people way smarter than me, because I tap into them. Even they don't even know necessarily what they can accomplish, but I think I do know what they can accomplish, and I try to extract their genius and channel it, and that's a big portion of the task as well.